favorite holiday cookie actually is a sort of jammy cookie. Not any other time of year. December 1st, like I want those jammy centers. Hi, I'm Genevieve Ko, Senior Editor at New York Times Cooking, and I am here today making guava and cream cheese twists. I love jam cookies, like buttery crust, jammy center. These are inspired by a pastry. They're called pastelitos, where they're actually puff pastry triangles or squares that are filled with cream cheese and guava paste, or sometimes guava jam. And I just love this combination of this fruit that is so sweet and tangy and has these great tropical notes, and then of course the creamy cream cheese. But to make them portable and to make them last longer than a day, I've turned them into cookies. I wanted to show off this beautiful color of guava paste. I feel like it's just such a lovely deep red color. And normally I'm always about like making baked goods taste good before I make them look good. But I think for the holidays it's really important that you get a little wow factor too sometimes. First thing we're gonna do now is make our dough. And this is a buttery cream cheese dough. So you wanna start with softened butter, and if I'm honest, this butter is not soft. Anytime you're making something like a pastry, you don't wanna heat it in any way that might cause it to melt, right? You need the butter to stay in its solid state. So you can actually just beat the butter first to get it to room temperature. So if this was already soft, I would put the cream cheese in too.
If you don't have a stand mixer, you can absolutely still make this dough, and you can do it by hand. You just need to make sure your butter is softened first. You can see when the butter is ready, when it starts to get a little fluffy. And the reason we're doing the dough this way is because we actually want the dough to develop more of like a tender pastry than a really flaky pie crust pastry. And we want them to really blend well together and develop a sort of fluffiness, because you're actually adding air into the butter and the cream cheese, and that's going to prevent the dough from being too tight and dense. You do have to make sure you keep scraping the bowl. I'm actually going to season the fat mixture instead of seasoning the dry mixture, and that way we can barely mix the flour in, because the more you mix in the flour, the tougher the dough will get. All right, and once that egg yolk is in there, we're gonna dump in all the flour at once. We just wanna do it on low speed. Once I can see that almost all the floury bits are incorporated here, whoops, wrong way. You can actually stop it before all the floury bits are incorporated and do that last part by hand so you're not overworking your dough at all. We're gonna actually chill it in separate pieces. If you know that you don't like to work that quickly with dough, you can even split it into 3 or 4. Drop the dough in the middle of the plastic wrap here. Not covered it exactly, but using the plastic wrap, shape it so that our fingers don't get crazy sticky. The dimensions of the rectangle actually don't matter, because you're ultimately gonna roll it, cut it, get it nice and squared off. So we're gonna just let that dough chill until it's really firm. Again, we don't want all that butter and cream cheese to be too soft when we work with it, but it can stay in the fridge for up to a day or 2 before you roll it and use it. So guava paste is really nice and firm, but it's actually even easier to cut when it's cold. So I threw it in the fridge while I was making the dough, and you can see how sticky it is, but I'm gonna split this in half. If your cutting board is doing this, one thing you can do is get a damp paper towel and set it underneath the board so it doesn't roll around. All right, I'm just gonna go ahead and cut this into 1/2-inch slices. I know sometimes people say, oh, if you oil the knife or spray it with nonstick spray, that will make it easier. This paste is so sticky that I found even if I did that, it didn't actually make a huge difference. Each of these pieces I'm actually going to cut in half again, the long way. So you basically want these little batons. So they're 1/2 inch thick, 1/2 inch wide, and then about 2 inches long. This, again, is sort of that Zen thing I was talking about. Sort of like when everything else is crazy and nutty, I feel like, okay, well, I can measure all this stuff, figure it out, and it's gonna be nice and even. I can tell it's ready because it feels really firm. I'm actually going to flour the surface, and I'm gonna also flour the pin. And I am generously flouring again because this is a pretty rich dough. So I'm also gonna flour the top of the dough, underneath it.
So whenever you're trying to maintain a shape, what you want to do is keep moving it. I just want a rectangle here, but I am rotating it a quarter of the way each time. So this dough we actually also roll pretty thin. We're rolling it to 1/8 of an inch because we're doing this twisty thing where you're going to end up with dough on top and bottom. You don't want too much dough because then you won't be able to taste the guava paste anymore. I can see I have a teeny little crack, so I'm just giving a little pat. My dough here is ready, and I want to make sure before I start cutting it that it can move. So, and you can absolutely use a knife, but I like to use a pizza wheel for this. So I'm just trimming off these edges, which I'm going to re-roll later, but trimming off the edges will just help you keep things nice and even. And again, you can absolutely skip this step and just go for a more rustic cookie look. So I want 2.5 inch long squares. So this is 5 inches here. So what I'm doing here is just marking 2.5 inches, marking in the middle, 2.5 inches. And this way, I just know that I can go straight down. I'm just gonna make these notches again at every 1.5 inches. Yeah, and this definitely works with like a long knife too, or even a pastry cutter. I just think it's really fun to cut with a pizza wheel. So now we're gonna go ahead and transfer these. They can just be like 1/2 inch apart or so. Oh, that is so deeply unsatisfying. I can deal with it. I can handle it. So at this point, if you feel like the dough is too soft for you to work with, you can actually pop it in the fridge while you roll out the second square of dough. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take my little guava paste batons here, and I'm gonna put them on these squares, but I'm gonna put them at an angle, corner to corner. When you eat a fresh guava, there's this wonderful balance of tanginess with its sweetness, but they're super hard to come by unless you live somewhere tropical. So part of what I love about guava paste is you get that sensation of tropical fruit being in a tropical place, and it really has an intense sweetness too that I think pairs really nicely with the dough that is barely sweetened. So now all our guava paste is down, our fingertips are no longer sticky, and you're just gonna take 2 opposite corners, like this is your little guava paste baby, and then you're just swaddling that baby. You just wanna make sure that it is encased in the dough, but not actually extending past it. You can absolutely play around with different shapes. This is just where I landed in terms of proportion of dough and also just the look of it. All right, so at this point, you can totally just bake them like this, but for a little bit of holiday sparkle, you only need a tiny bit. So you just wanna give a little brush, just enough to help the sugar stick. It's not like when you're sprinkling salt to season high up. You want to sprinkle nice and close so you can make sure you cover the part that you want. We'll see how these look with silver. I just like the sparkles because of the sparkliness. And it's okay if some sugar gets on the guava paste, of course. You can absolutely also sprinkle with just granulated sugar or sugar in the raw, some sort of coarser sugar. So the nice thing about these sort of dough jammy cookies is that you can actually make them the way you like them. You definitely want the dough to be cooked through all the way. You don't want any raw dough, but you can actually let them stay pretty pale. So you can see here, they're just golden and the tops are really nice and pale, and that's gonna give you a more tender, almost slightly cakey cookie. Or you can do them the way I like them, which is to let the edges here get pretty dark golden brown, and you can see the bottom is also a darker brown. That means you're gonna get a crunchy, crispy edge, but you're still gonna get the jammy middle, but that will, of course, mean your jam's gonna melt a little more too. But the best part is, of course, at the end, you have all these cookies to share with other people. And before I do it, I always wanna make sure I give one a little taste test. It's exactly what I love. It does make me feel like maybe I've gone somewhere warm and tropical, even though I haven't. And they're perfect. Right after they've cooled, they really taste like pastelitos. The pastry is just shattering in my mouth with all this rich butteriness, and I can taste the tang of the cream cheese. And the guava paste in the middle is still soft and sticky and melty. And it's just a really fun, nice spin on a jam cookie. And again, I love the process. I just think it's such a calming, wonderful way to spend an afternoon or an evening. And I hope you really enjoy baking them too. So happy baking.